It was just past 4 in the morning when the train rolled into the darkness, hauling drums of fuel and rows of sealed military freight, holding a steady 60 kilometers an hour. 15 kilometers still separated it from the river crossing it needed to reach before dawn. 86 kilometers behind it lay the front line, far enough, by every instinct of the men riding in that cab, that the war simply couldn't reach this deep into the rear. They were about to learn how wrong that instinct was. Above the corridor, 14 Ukrainian long-range strike drones were already in the air, converging from different directions on the same stretch of track. 2 targets had been marked for that night, and both were meant to be gone before the sun came up. The railway bridge spanning the river ahead, and the train now closing in on it. Nothing about the scene gave any of that away yet. To anyone watching from the ground, it was just another supply run, another quiet night on a quiet line far from the fighting. In a tree line above the tracks, a 2-man Ukrainian reconnaissance team had been in position for hours, waiting for exactly this. One carried a thermal scope, a laser rangefinder, and a radio. His task was simple to describe and difficult to execute: clock the train's exact speed, count its cars, and pass a single word that would set the rest of the operation in motion. Beside him lay a sniper armed with a UR-10 rifle, whose entire job that night was to keep both of them alive if they were spotted. Neither man would fire a single round before it was over. Watching, timing, and reporting was the whole mission, and it would be enough. The aircraft converging on the corridor were UJ-26 Bober drones, a Ukrainian-built, long-range strike platform roughly the size of a small private aircraft, capable of flying hundreds of kilometers on a pre-programmed route and delivering a 20-kilogram warhead at the end of it, at a little over $100,000 each. They are cheap by the standards of modern strike weapons, expendable in a way that the systems built to stop them are not. The 14 drones in the air that night were split into 3 separate groups, each assigned a different role, each time to arrive at a different moment in the sequence that was about to unfold. The first 4 drones weren't sent to destroy anything. Their entire purpose was to be seen. They came in low and slow from 2 separate bearings, deliberately exposing themselves, with one goal: force the corridor's air defense network to switch on and give away exactly where it was. It worked almost immediately. A Costa 2E2 low-altitude radar system, built specifically to track targets flying close to the ground, picked up the incoming drones and began feeding target data to the batteries nearby. On paper, that radar can see out to 150 kilometers. Against something the size of a Bober hugging the terrain, that range collapses to somewhere near 35 kilometers, and even within that shorter distance, the returns kept breaking up against ground clutter. The radar could tell the crews that something was inbound. It could not tell them cleanly how many aircraft there were, or exactly which line they were flying. And a warning that can't be turned into a firing solution is little more than noise with a general direction attached to it. The system meant to turn that warning into a kill was a Tor M2, a mobile short-range missile platform designed for precisely this kind of low-altitude threat. Its radar picked up the first wave at roughly 15 kilometers out, and its crew did exactly what the numbers told them to do. A Tor can track and engage up to 4 targets simultaneously. The first wave was 4 drones. 4 against 4 is a fight the Tor wins, and on this night, it did. The Tor M2 killed 2 of the 4 decoy drones outright, its missiles finding them within seconds of getting a lock. A Pantsir S1 stationed nearby, covering the short-range gap that a Tor typically leaves behind, caught a third and brought it down as well. The 4th drone lost its satellite navigation link somewhere inside a wall of jamming and drifted quietly off its course, coming down in a field near a stretch of trackside equipment with a dull thud and no meaningful damage. 3 kills and 1 stray. From inside the corridor, it looked like a clean, complete defense. Every radar and every gun crew now had their attention locked onto the bearing that first wave had come from a direction that had, by that point, already finished doing its job. The decoys had cost 4 drones and bought exactly what they were meant to buy: a defensive network staring the wrong way, at exactly the moment it mattered most. The jamming that had taken down the 4th drone came from a Russian pole. 2-1 system, a network of jammers mounted on towers and masts spread across the region, built to flood the corridor with interference on satellite navigation frequencies. It had done precisely what it was designed to do. It had degraded the drone's accuracy. It had already sent one tumbling into an empty field. But a Bober doesn't fall out of the sky simply because its GPS signal disappears. It shifts to inertial navigation, a self-contained gyroscopic system that holds a heading using nothing from space at all. and its operators can still make fine adjustments in its final seconds through a separate data link. Pole 2. One could make the incoming drones less precise, it could not make them stop. That distinction, largely invisible to the crews manning the radar screens, was about to matter far more than anyone in the corridor understood. 2.5 minutes after the first wave broke apart, the second wave arrived 6 Bober drones this time, and every single one of them was headed for the bridge. The bridge was the entire reason this stretch of track mattered in the first place. It carried 2 separate rail lines across the river, forming the one structural choke point through which Russian fuel, ammunition, and troops moved between 2 occupied regions. A single 20-kilogram warhead was never going to bring down a span like that on its own. One Bober cannot drop a bridge, but 6 of them, arriving together and putting their hits on the same rails, the same deck edges, and the same load-bearing joints, present an entirely different kind of problem. The Pantsir and the Tor both tried to respond, and both ran straight into the arithmetic that had been working against the corridor's defenses since the first wave appeared. Each system can track and engage 4 targets, but every one of those engagement channels has to lock on, fire, and confirm a kill before it can move to the next target in line. 6 drones arriving within seconds of one another, spread out across the width of the span, with the leftover radar clutter from the first wave still fogging the screens, was simply more than either system could work through in the time available. They managed to bring down 2. 4 got through. One of those 4 had been caught by the pole. 2-1 jamming on its way and its satellite fix gone, its guidance degraded, and yet it flew the last stretch on inertial navigation and struck the bridge anyway, a little less precisely, but just as hard as the others. 4 warheads landing along the same span within seconds of each other was enough. One rail line took a direct hit above a support column and dropped, rails and decking together, straight down into the river below. The second line, a few meters away, wasn't fully severed, but it was twisted out of shape, its bed torn apart beneath it, a span technically still standing, and functionally good for nothing. Where the crossing had been only moments earlier, a column of fire and smoke began climbing off the river into the dark, visible for kilometers in every direction. 15 kilometers up the line, the driver of the supply train was the first to see it, a dull orange glow sitting low on the horizon, exactly where the bridge was supposed to be, growing brighter with every passing second as the train rolled steadily closer to it. He threw the train into emergency braking almost the instant he understood what he was looking at. It did not stop, not quickly, and not easily. A loaded freight train moving at 60 kilometers an hour does not stop because a driver wills it to. It stops only once. Its own enormous weight finally runs out of momentum, and that process takes distance the driver simply didn't have to spare. 15 seconds passed before the full braking effort even took hold, and in those 15 seconds, the train rolled another 250 meters closer to the fire, still climbing off the river. Then the long deceleration began, more than a kilometer of steel grinding against steel. This was the other half of what the bridge strike had been for all along. Drop a crossing in front of a train this heavy, and it cannot stop in time. It cannot turn. It can only grind to a halt out in the open and sit there, exposed. It finally stopped in open country, more than 4 kilometers short of the burning bridge, dead still, unable to move. And it still wasn't over, because 4 Bober drones had never gone anywhere near the corridor that night. They had flown a longer, looping route, and were holding roughly 18 kilometers out, waiting on a single piece of information, word that the train had stopped. A moving train under braking is a difficult, uncertain target. A stopped one is simply a map. Holding 4 drones back like that was a gamble, burning fuel and time circling in the dark, betting that the wrecked bridge would strand the train somewhere still within reach. If it had come to rest and simply reversed back down the line, that reserve wave would have been left with nothing to hit and no range left to search for another target. At 4:24, the train finished stopping. The spotter in the tree line read it car by car through his thermal scope, a line of cooling shapes. Except for one. A tanker of liquid fuel sheds heat far more slowly than an empty freight car, and it sat there glowing, while everything around it faded dark. Directly behind it rode a covered wagon, riding low on its springs, clearly loaded with something heavy. Fuel sitting right next to something heavy was all the confirmation the spotter needed. He passed the word, and the 4th wave turned in. For 6 minutes, nothing intercepted them. Every defensive system in the corridor was still 4 kilometers away, aimed at a bridge that no longer existed, and a Tor or a Pantsir can't fight effectively on the move. To engage, each one has to stop, level itself, bring its radar online, and reacquire a target, and that takes minutes, not seconds. Only one Pantsir repositioned in time. It caught the first incoming drone and shot it down short of the train. Then its own success worked against it. The crew had already dismounted. There were now soldiers standing on open ground, with a fuel-loaded train sitting directly behind the drones the Pantsir needed to fire at, and the drones were coming in low, under 20 meters off the ground. The only shot available was flat and level, straight through the men on the ground and into the fuel behind them. The safe firing lanes had narrowed to almost nothing. At 4:31, the first surviving drone struck the locomotive directly, punching through the cab and into the engine beneath it. In that instant, the machine that had pulled the train into the trap stopped being an engine at all. The second drone hit the fuel tanker. A breech tank of fuel doesn't burn slowly. It finds air and ignition in the same instant, and the tanker went up in a single rising column of fire that lit the entire stopped train end to end. That fire didn't just destroy, it became a beacon. The third drone no longer needed a targeting solution. It simply steered for the light, straight into the covered wagon riding heavy behind the tanker, the one the spotter had flagged from the tree line. Whatever that wagon carried answered in a string of secondary detonations that kept walking through the train long after the drone that triggered them was already gone. A dead locomotive, a burning tanker, a shredded munitions wagon, all of it sitting more than 4 kilometers from a bridge that, by first light, no longer existed, a key supply line between two occupied regions cut in a single night for the cost of a handful of $100,000 drones. The two men in the tree line never fired a shot. They watched the fire light the horizon, packed their gear, and disappeared before the first recovery crew arrived. If this kind of night-by-night breakdown of how a modern strike actually comes together is something you want more of, that's exactly what this channel does every week. Real operations, reconstructed piece by piece, no guesswork. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment with which theater you want covered next. And if this one held your attention the whole way through, share it with someone who'd sit through it too.